Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True, and today is the 30th of December 2022 as I continue to read from the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And I would have not have known of this particular book if it hadn't been for a friend who lives in Arizona who talked about this years ago. I never even heard of Tavistock. Her name is Kathy. Um, and I've searched somewhat valiantly or trying to find a copy of this book and never could find it. So I found it on a PDF deal and was able to download it and to um, read it. And then I wanted to reread it for those in the audience today because very few people can get this book. If you examine the deal with eBay, there are copies of it out there. That is Tavistock Institute. But the sad part is simply is that most people cannot afford it because that book has been kept from people. Um, there's other writer here, Daniel Estulin. I think it was done in 2015, but it's not the original one I would think I've been interested in, which is the one by Dr. John Coleman. And one here is shown in, actually two are shown here. One is for $450 for that book, or best author offer. And the other particular one here is for basically $1,000. And these are paperback books, folks. And I see only looks like two copies of it. That's it. Actually, there's another copy. There's one here for $360, and four copy here in America for $374.49. And then there's one in England here, I see in the United Kingdom. I wish this book would be reprinted for those out there who want to know. There's another copy here for $450 also. But these books are so expensive that, who's got $450 for a book? And the problem, if you bought the book and read it, then you try to resell it, you would probably not get your money back out of it. This book is basically to keep people from actually searching for it. In fact, I asked the local library here to see if I could get the interlibrary loan from it. And the sad part simply is that no, they won't. I can't even can't read it in a paper bound book. If you can get the book, maybe it'd be good to you to ask someone to publish it for you. And I think that basically, if you did it with a reasonable amount, you could actually sell some copies for $45, $50. And yeah, you might turn a little bit of a profit, but also you would be able to enable others to read it if there's anyone out there who wants to do the right thing. So here we go, the Tavistock Institute, Chapter 21, from Dr. John Coleman. And we're going to start at, this is page 127. We're about halfway through this book, not quite. So his chapters are what I call very short. So we'll probably go through one or two, or probably go two or three tonight. So let's go. Chapter 21, the Soldiers' Memorial and World War I Cemeteries. The cost of the Bush War against Iraq was running at around 420 billion in mid-2005. And the Bush family wants more money for their ill-starred venture, and knowing the American people and their hapless, helpless, ill but useless representatives in legislature, Bush will get what he wants. The figure of the dollar costs of World War I do not tell anything about the sorrow and suffering brought in to America, that is, by Wilson the transgressor. It is so sad. This is my commentary. It's so sad that one person bought in this whole idea and has actually really has destroyed this country in many ways. And I don't know really any good presidents, to be honest with you. in what they've done. Most of them were cowards. Most never stood for anything. I'd probably say Andrew Jackson was probably one of the better ones out of the whole pit. But anyway, which insert here in a recent article which gives a pointed personal touch to the dreadful loss of life in the nightmarish war. Several weeks ago, I visited with my family the Soldier Memorial Museum in the heart of downtown St. Louis. It is a huge and deeply impressive building dedicated in 1936 by President Roosevelt as a memorial to 1,075 men of St. Louis who died in the First World War. The memorial is painfully beautiful, all mosaics and marble, with terrazotted floors and Bedford stone sculptures. It is dominated by the vast black granite cenotaph in the center, covered with the hundreds of dead men's names in neat row upon row. On the day we visited this striking but haunted place, it seemed completely empty. While empty of visitors, it was however full of the spirits and voices of faces of the pale, touse-headed boys in neatly pressed uniforms who had marched off from St. Louis, that is at that time 86 years ago, to fight in a glorious war so far away in a far-off land, boys who had never come back home. The poignancy of that was rendered all the stronger by the fact that we are living daily with the repercussions of current conflict, the savage, bloody war in Iraq. We read daily of the boys who will never come back home. What struck me most as I walked around the memorial and the museum holding my newborn baby girl was the fact that it looked like so many memorials that I've visited in my home country of Scotland. It also looked like those I had visited in France, in England, and in Canada, and New Zealand, and it looked just like the memorials in almost every other country touched by the carnage of World War I. In almost every country touched by the carnage of World War I, the so-called war to end all wars, men rushed to join the military and marched off to war with great enthusiasm. They believed it would be a short, sharp, and successful war, fought for good reasons and glorious for the winners. They believed they were building a better world. They were wrong. An average of 5,500 men died every single day for 4.5 years in the First World War. That is roughly 4 men per minute, each minute, for 4.5 years until 10 million men were dead. And this was a banker's war for folks. The First World War did more than destroy lives. It destroyed the confidence in progress and prosperity and in reasonableness of civilized human beings that had become so characteristic of the 19th century. The war destroyed much of the next generation, which would have provided leadership to Europe. And this morning, as I sit holding my baby girl, I read daily reports of escalating violence in Iraq, with British, Iraqi, and American men continue to die. The St. Louis Soldier, a memorial to a war that should have never been fought, haunts me, and the ghost haunts the memorial. It was the worst of all disasters. The war that should have never been fought haunts me. The neoconservative brains in the U.S. administration would have been wise to visit places like this and think long and hard about the lessons of such memorials before embarking on a war in the Middle East that has already killed an unknown number of people, which will certainly kill many more, directly and indirectly. This was written by Professor Dr. James Lackland, spelled L-A-C-H-L-A-N, Macleod, M-A-C-L-E-O-D, Associate Professor of History at the University of Evansville, Indiana. My experiences parallel those of Professor Macleod. I visited the battlefields of Verdun and Passchendaele, where most of the slaughter so ably recounted occurred. I tried to imagine 10 million soldiers dying so young, the terror, the horror, and the sorrow that they experienced, and the inconsolable sorrow of the ones they left behind. While standing in the afternoon fading light in one of the many war cemeteries in France and looking upon thousands of neat white crosses marching across the war cemetery, I was overcome by anger and then overwhelmed by grief. So much so that I swear I heard the cries and shouts of anguish of the dead calling for justice to be done, so cruelly cut down in their prime, and seemed to see their faces reflected in the clouds above. It was a mystical experience I will never forget. much like the experience of a British officer who visited those battlefields in 1919. Yesterday, I visited the battlefields of the last years. The place was scarcely recognizable. Instead of a wilderness of ground torn up by shells, the round was a garden of wildflowers and tall grasses. Most remarkable of all was the appearance of many thousands of white butterflies which fluttered around. It was as if the souls of the dead soldiers had come to haunt the spot where so many fell. It was eerie to see them in the silence. He was so still that I could almost hear the beat of the butterflies' wings. From records in the British War Museum in London. My intense feelings of outrage made me determined to find out everything I could about a terrible war that began with massive gout of propaganda, the scourge of the modern world. It was another decisive reason for writing this book and exposing the evil of Tavistock. Let me interject here something. Most of these men who started this, I'm trying to think of his name. I think his name is John Williams, the American psychologist. That was the first to study the mind of the brain, that is the mind. The intentions were supposed to be good. And in reality, they did discover certain things. But along later, as we discover, certain men, instead of actually helping man, has gone the opposite way. And what do I mean by that? Well, they know how a human being actually acts and reacts based upon fear. And so what they do now, and what they're doing today, in our own time, using fear. You see, these people are the ones who want to rule the world. They've been around for a long time, folks. And I've shared this before in some ways. And you need to get it in your head. The enemy itself doesn't have any feelings whatsoever. They believe they're the people of God. And if you look in Revelations, they're the synagogue of Satan and who they are. That's who they are. They don't worship the creator. They worship the opposite of that, the destroyer. Unless people paid heed to what I'm sharing or read these books and understand what is going on, we're already in a dark time in our own history here in America and actually in the Western world, as these people continue to control, dominate others as though we are children, or I should say babies. They don't have any feelings for anybody because they're psychopaths. They are the true psychopaths indeed. And we'll go through that. We're going to share that in the near future. I'll talk about that. People like Theodore Adorno, Bernays, H.G. Wells. Names are plentiful that were involved in Tavistock. And how people are still unaware because no one knows about this. It's been covered up so cleverly in many years over and over. That's why I've been doing the Redemption Manual 4.5 to explain to you about American history. But I want to explain to you what Tavistock is all about. Because in reality, the title, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, is basically to steer people in the way they want things to happen. Okay? And they're doing a damn good job of it too. Okay, because they control the media, almost every aspect of it. And what little you share is considered, most people laugh at it because they don't understand what's going on. And if you don't have freedom, you truly aren't free at all. And everything else is insignificant, you see. Nothing else counts. If you're not free, you're not free. You don't have anything else, folks. It's the foundation, period. So anyway, I want to inject that. It was another decisive reason for writing this book and explaining the evils of Tavistock. That is Sir Roger Casement and thought Lord Bryce ought to have been hanged for treason, and I feel Wilson ought to have suffered a similar fate, which would have stopped Roosevelt and Churchill from plunging the world into a second round of carnage. Propaganda prevailed. The Western civilized world was lost. The world we knew, the world established by a Western civilization, is gone, folks. The Spinnaker gloomy predictions proved right. In place of our Western civilized world, we shall soon see the ghastly edifice of the new communist social one world government looming up through the darkness of the coming long night. Let there be no doubt that the First World War was caused by Britain and her ally, the United States of America, with the aid of Wellington House. The war could not have been mounted without the dark forces of Wellington House. The name of Lord Grey, Grey, its principal architect, will go down in history as a traitorous, dishonest politician. There is no consensus as to why Britain started World War I, but by 1916, the German army had defeated the French and British armies in the most decisive manner. Wilson was under heavy pressure to get American troops shipped to Europe, so Wellington House unleashed an all-out propaganda war against the American people, but which nevertheless remained ineffective until the Bryce Report was published. And I explained that today earlier. To understand what is happening in Iraq is impossible unless we make ourselves fully conscious of the terrible propaganda developed and deployed against the British and American people in 1913 and 1940. It was one of the darkest and most foul chapters in history, with Wilson mouthing such lies as a just war, which is bullshit, and a war to end all wars, which is bullshit, and a war to make the world safe for democracy is bullshit. And that's my last words, bullshit, is what this is. Mr. Wilson was a spokesperson. He really never used his noggin, you see. Colonel Mandel House basically was the puppeteer to the puppet. Mr. Wilson was a puppet. What the war was about was to make trade safe for Britain, especially, and France now being threatened by German industry. But they were words and obfuscation of his true intent and meaningless in that context, just what you expect from a politician. The kind of bunkum one finds on a society page. Wilson talked of making the world safe for democracy. Was nothing more than the colored gas bubbles. He was proposing to go into a war on the side of the English, who were at that very moment making sure there was no popular democracy in the empire. The English had just brutally finished off the Boers in South Africa in a cruel war that lasted 3 years. I want to add something here to interject for you. All these people who revere not only Wilson, what he does, but also Churchill. Churchill was enormously involved with the military at this time. This is before he became the prime minister. And he went to South Africa, and one of his ideas was to create a concentration camp. And that concentration camp was towards the Boers, B-O-E-R-S, the Afrikaners, that's who they are. If you know anything about South Africa, you need to look it up. These were Dutch settlers who were farmers, you see. And what Mr. Churchill decided was to put children and women in concentration camps. I told this, folks. I told this. It's the absolute truth of what they did. And this would allow the English to eventually win the war. They were losing the war in South Africa. They were getting defeated on all fronts until they brought this in. And the Boers had to eventually give in because of the family, of wives and children. I tell you what, I hope people realize who Churchill really is, because he's no hero, folks. He's the most incompetent person as a leader, as a prime minister, but most politicians are incompetent. He was an alcoholic and he was a gambler. And they would have to bail him out, that is, money-wise, because he would go in deficits. He spent money as though there was no tomorrow. That's the type a prime minister that Churchill was. You need to see the other side, that is, of what you basically put these people on pedestals. They're not, that's not the truth. You need to understand that the press is controlled by 99% of it out there. You need to know the real truth of what has happened in the past. You need to stop putting these people on pedestals because they're not worthy of any worship at all, period. Because they've killed many people's lives as though it's a sport. So when Wilson wanted to make the world safe for democracy, which that doesn't make any sense, you're gonna quote unquote go to war to Germany to make it safe, as though Germany is an enemy. What kind of bullshit were you drinking, mister? You need to get upset about these things, people. That's another thing. People said to me, why do you get upset about this? Because innocent people were killed. And we're still under the subjection of those people today. It hasn't gotten any better, folks. It's worse. There are far less people that know the truth today than they did 100 years ago. And especially, he continues on here, Dr. John Coleman says he ought to have gone to war on the side of Germany against England, the aggressor and instigator of the war. They're the ones that started it, folks. Instead of making the world safe for democracy, it turned out to be the greatest calamity ever to befall civilized nations, that is falling into the clutches of men who were corrupt, immoral liars, to a war quiet, properly called the Great War, as though it's something great to be in honor. It was, of course, only great in size and scope. We will never understand how the United States became the sole great power unless we confess to the sins of Wilson and the British establishment of 100 years ago. The United States has continually entangled itself in the affairs of other sovereign nations' affairs, despite the dire warnings of George Washington. And the first instance of this was our entry into World War I and the failed League of Nations. Wilson made full use of the master propagandist of Wellington House, using sloganeers as a sword, told the reluctant Senate that if he did not ratify the League of Nations, it will break the heart of the world. Oh, please. God damn your soul, mister. Thanks to Senator Cabot Lodge and a member of U.S. senators who after sober reflection and examination of the U.S. Constitution, declined to ratify the League of Nations Treaty because they discovered it sought to kill U.S. sovereignty. You betcha it did. You see, Mr. Wilson was a one-worlder. He was a communist himself. He was a progressive. And those who tell you that progressives are positive, they're telling you a lie. They're not progressing. They're progressing towards communism. You say, well, communism's gone. No, it's just gone underground, folks. If you read anything about death by governments, you find out governments kill their own people, period. Using and abusing his penchant for propaganda, Wilson tried to carry the day by declaring his re-election campaign a great and solemn referendum for acceptance of the treaty. But not having Lord Bryce to back him, lost and was well swept away. Unfortunately, it did not take the pliers of propaganda long to take a comeback with the revamped United Nations version of the League of Nations. Under Truman, not the simply hat seller from Missouri, but the master mason, betrayed the American people by permitting this one world edifice to the U.S., and Truman used propaganda left over by Wilson to persuade key senators to vote for his lies. What Truman did was force the American nation to enter into a pact with the devil, of power over justice and truth. Justice from the barrel of a gun, that is. We apply that justice in World War II through mass bombing of civilian centers without regard to loss of life. We used atomic bombs on Japan, although the war was over. And the propaganda ploy of quote-unquote shock and order echoed by Rumsfeld in the unconstitutional war against Iraq. Are you aware that Mr. Rumsfeld actually met with the leader of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and actually egged him on to become a military power and then betrayed him later on? You need to know who these people are, folks. They're not heroes. They're traitors. Let's continue to chapter 22. Peace is not popular. The Second World War followed an almost identity pattern of World War I. concluding a peace treaty with Hitler, Neville Chamberlain was at once subjected to a mighty propaganda barrage directed by the Tavistock Institute. Chamberlain had defied the Committee of 300 and backed a newcomer, a rank outside who was seen as a threat to world socialism. The world did not learn the truth about Chamberlain, or that he was an able politician bent upon avoiding another war, or that he was well experienced and had worked out an equitable peace plan, which of course did not suit the munitions merchant vultures sitting on the fence, waiting to pick clean the wealth of nations in the courts of their sons. The vast propaganda machine set up at the Tavistock Institute in London immediately swung into action against Chamberlain as after he announced his successful peace plan. Shakespeare said that the evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones. The good done by Chamberlain did not suit the warmongers, and they buried Chamberlain under a catalog of propaganda and outright lies. These lies were the work of specialists in propaganda employed at the Tavistock Institute, notable, that is, Peter Howard, Michael Foote, and Frank Owen. One of these men, employing the pen name of Cato, so vilified Chamberlain that the odium they attached to his name lives even to this day in July of 2005. Such is the power of this mighty Tavistock propaganda machine. In later years, long after the deceitful propaganda experts had done their work, British historian and scholar David Dunton wrote a book, Neville Chamberlain, in which he gave a balanced assessment of the former prime minister. Far from being a dupe of Hitler and a fool, Chamberlain showed considerable negotiation skills and was a highly competent leader who fought valiantly to prevent another war, but that ran contrary to the wishes of the Committee of the 300. Churchill got his delicious war, but by 1941, the Allies had virtually been driven off the continent of Europe, with huge losses of manpower. France, Belgium, Holland, and Denmark were already occupied. Germany offered generous terms to England, but warmonger Churchill rejected peace overtures and turned to his old workhorse ally, the United States, to provide men, money, and materials to continue the delicious war. All wars, folks, are evil, all of them. To the American people, we say in deep sorrow, when will you ever learn? Well, will you ever learn, people? Really? When are you going to distinguish between propaganda and genuine information? When are you going to put proposals for war to constitutional test? Wilson was a consummated liar and a hater of the U.S. Constitution. He stated that. He hated it. He actually looked down at the common people. It's the truth. Yet, thanks to the huge propaganda drive organized, run, and maintained by Wellington House, he was able to accomplish his mission by operating under a banner of patriotism, which overcame vigorous opposition to the war. Between Wilson, Churchill, and Roosevelt, tremendous damage was done to Western Christian civilization. Yet, in spite of this fact, aware propaganda continues to wash over their names as it rid them of the blood on the millions of their hands. Instead of being vilified, numerous monuments to their honor are to be found all over Europe and in America. A multi-billion-dollar monument is to be erected in honor of Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose treason engineered the Japanese to fire the first shot, as the Simpson diaries record. Pearl Harbor opened the way to communist control of China, and ultimately the way to a new communist socialistic new world order inside a one world government. Our only hope in a veil of despair is that this work might help to open the eyes of the American people so that they will resolve never again to fall for propaganda. Although in the wake of 9/11 tragedy, it now seems a vain hope. We recently lived through the disturbing experience of being rushed into an unnecessary war in Serbia, Afghanistan, and Iraq through the expanded propaganda tools in the hands of Tavistock experts, the same tool used to vilify the Kaiser and Chamberlain. President Milosevic was demoralized, vilified, belittled, and finally driven from office. President Milosevic was illegally arrested and illegally transported to Holland for trial by a kangaroo court that has been trying for nearly 4 years to convict him of war crimes. George Bush, that is, the younger, refused to give the mediators in Iraq time to work because he knew that it would prevent war. I'm sorry, that it would prevent war. He refused to give the UN weapons inspectors to complete their work. Instead, declared with the evil intent of all propagandists that the world could not wait for 10 days more because of imminent danger posed by the weapons of mass destruction in the hands of Iraqi's dictator, the butcher of Baghdad. Thus, once again, the people of the United States were swept along by a flood tide of naked lies put out by the propagandists at Tavistock Institute and echoed by the American media, especially the cheap propaganda organ in the United States, Fox News, or we would call it false news. In one respect, Americans are more fortunate this time. We have not had to wait for 100 years to pass for the truth to come out. There was no weapon of mass destruction, folks. There were no chemical or bacteriological factories, no long-range rockets to cause a mushroom cloud over Boston, courtesy of the apologists for Tavistock propaganda and mass brainwasher Miss Rice. I'm speaking about Condoleezza Rice. And Mr. Bush and his co-partner in crime, British Prime Minister Blair. But in spite of being caught in a web of lies, all the above mentioned remain in office. They have not been sacked for the scores of lies they swore was the truth, and from which they are now not even bothering to extricate themselves, struggling at criticism with the help of spin masters, that is, polished liars like Karl Rove and Alistair Campbell. Let us hope that the cause of justice will be served and that those responsible for the tragedy of the bombing of Serbia, Afghanistan, and the unwarranted invasion of Iraq will be brought before the bar of the international justice to account for their crimes. The voices of the dead cry out from the battlefields of Europe, the Pacific, from Serbia and Afghanistan, and from Iraq, lamenting that they died because brainwashing triumphant and propaganda prevailed. The scourge of the modern world, rolling out from the Tavistock Institute like some foul nistama from a dang and nausea bog, immolating the world, blinding it to the truth. There's some pictures here of Lord Northcliffe and Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays and Eleanor Roosevelt here as I continue down the scrolling here. And then there's a picture of W.R. Bion, B-I-O-N. There's a picture of Gregory Basin. These are all social scientists at Tavistock. R.D. Lang, R. Lang, L-A-I-N-G. Also pictures of Eric L. Trist, the social scientist at Tavistock. Leon Trotsky, the military and the Marxist leader. Real name was Lev Bronstein. I want to point out one thing is, the whole idea, the word racism was invented by Trotsky. It was a word that was invented to actually divide the races, folks. That's what they've done to you. You see. This is in the 1930s. And that word has been thrown around by the media all over the place, here in the United States and elsewhere. And to point out simply is that certain groups of people with a certain race are bad and the other ones are basically not. When reality simply is it's just divide and fall. It's the destruction, of the Western world. Tell me, where are you going to run, folks? Where are you going to run at? Tell me where you're going to go at. See, there's nowhere else to go. You're going to either stand here or you're going to fall. There's nowhere to run. William Munzenberger was the brilliant Russian spy and leading propagandist. You have Lord Northcliffe and Adolf Hitler. H.G. Wells, British author, leading Fabians and Secret Service agent. Did you know that? Do you know that H.G. Wells was that way? He wrote War of Worlds, George Bernard Shaw, Irish playwright, and a Fabian. People think these little things these guys say, these little quotes, are the real them. No, it's not. No, it's not, folks. Wake up. So we continue on. Walter Rathenau, leading German industrial financial advisor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and then Lord Bertrand Russell, who's a British socialist, author, and an elder statesman of the 300. He's one of the 300, Committee of 300. Anyway, I wanted to just tell you some of the main names. There's just many of them that were involved in the Tavistock Institute. Unbelievable. And in reality, this Tavistock Institute has done everything to belittle man and destroy man. So I'm kind of getting off the pageant here. So I want to, and you have the right and left that both are basically used in order to play on the people and divide people also. People like Rush Limbaugh, people like Sean Hannity, people like Tucker Carlson, people like Matt Drudge, people like G. Gordon Liddy, people like Peggy Newman, people like Brian Williams, Bill O'Reilly, Lawrence Kukalow, Dick Morris, John Stossel, William Bennett, Oliver North, Michael Savage, Michael Reagan, and Joe Scarborough to continue to keep you in division, propose war after war. So chapter 23 here is the Tavistock Institute, Britain controlled the United States. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations is situated in London on the grounds of Sussex University, Sussex, England, where most of its research facilities are located. Tavistock remains as important today as it was when I first revealed its existence early in 1969. I have been accused of having been a part of Tavistock because I worked in close proximity to Tavistock, Sussex facility, and knew so much of its history. Most of Tavistock's most recent activity has had, and is still having, a profound influence upon the way we live in America and upon our political institutions. Tavistock is believed to be behind sorry, I misjudged my place here, is behind the pro-abortion policy, the proliferation of drugs, the sodomy and lesbianism, family traditions, and the fierce attack on the Constitution. Our misconduct in foreign policy and our economic systems programmed to fail. Apart from John Rawlings Rees, no two men made such a difference to world politics and world events as shaped at Tavistock than Edward Bernays and his double nephew of Sigmund Freud and Kurt Lewin. That's Lewin. A third man must be included here, although he was never on the faculty at Tavistock, and I refer to Willie Munzenberg, whose propaganda methods and applications so crucial to the modern age of mass communication earned him the title the greatest propagandist in the world. No one knows who this guy is. I didn't know who he was. Undoubtedly the most brilliant man of his era. He began his work before World War I. Munzenberg was responsible for sanitizing the Bolsheviks after they overthrew the Romanov dynasty. Munzenberg definitely shaped the ideas and methods put into practice by Bernays and Lewin. His legendary exploits in handling Leon Tepper, the Kapellmeister of the I'll spell that, Rottkappell, conductor of the Red Orchestra spy ring, made Munzenberg the master spy of every intelligence agency in existence. Tepper was trained by Munzenberg and he never got caught. Tepper was able to obtain all the secrets of Britain and the United States in World War II. There was hardly a single secret plan the Allies launched that was not already known to Tepper, who passed the information to the KGB and the GRU in Moscow. In his field, Bernays was equally brilliant, but I suspect that most of his ideas originated with his famous uncle, Sigmund. As for his ideas of propaganda, there's little doubt that he borrowed from Munzenberg. And this is reflected in Bernays' classic Propaganda that was published in 1928. The thesis of the book is that it's entirely proper and national right for governments to organize public opinion to conform to official policies. You see, that's part of, when you vote, you actually are consenting. So what they'd use a poll for is you're giving them, when you're giving your consent. That's what you're doing. Munzenberg was bold enough to put his basic tenets about propaganda into practice well before Bernays or Joseph Goebbels, the German Minister of Popular Enlightenment, as the Minister of Propaganda was called. The propaganda specialists of the Nazi Party greatly admired Munzenberg's work and modeled his own propaganda program closely upon Munzenberg's methods. Goebbels always took care to credit Munzenberg as the father of propaganda, even when few knew very little about him. Goebbels, who had made a particular study of how Munzenberg had used his mastery of the science of propaganda when Lenin drafted him to blunt The appalling felicity generated in 1921 when 25 million peasants in the Volga region died from the ravages of famine. That's right. They killed the peasants very easily because the peasants thought they were going to get something better and they got something far worse. Thus it came about the German-born Mosenberg became the darling of the Bolsheviks. To quote from a recent history account, Mosenberg, who by then had returned to Berlin, where he was later elected to Reichstag as a communist deputy, was charged with setting up a bogus charity, the Foreign Committee for the Organization of Workers' Relief for the Hungary and the Soviet Union, the purpose of which was to pretend to the world that humanitarian relief was coming from a source other than Herbert Hoover's American Relief Organizations. In this, Mosenberg was altogether successful. Mosenberg gained the attention of the directors of the former Welding House, which in 1921 had changed its name to Tavistock Institute of Human Relations under director of Major General John Rawlings Rees, formerly of the British Army Psychological Warfare Bureau School. It will not come as a surprise to readers who have followed my work that much of the techniques adopted and perfected by Mosenberg were adopted by Bernays and his colleagues, such as Kurt Lewin, such as Eric Triss, such as Darwin Cartwright and H.V. Dix and W.R. Bryan at Tavistock, who then taught the methods to the Central Intelligence Agency. So Mosenberg was not the only communist to profoundly influence events in the United States. I happen to believe that the Tavistock aided in preparing the abortion brief that was subsequently presented to the Supreme Court in 1973 as the original work, and when in fact it was merely a recital of what Madam, I've never heard of her name, so I'm going to spell her name to you, Kollontai, the founder of Women's Liberation Movement and the free love proponent in the USSR, had written. Never heard of the lady. I'll have to do some research on her. A Bolshevik commissar in leading light, her book is a diatribe against the sanity of marriage and the family as the most important social unit in Christian countries. Kollontai, that's the way I know how to pronounce it, of course, took her feminism straight from the pages of the Communist Manifesto of 1848. George Orwell, the MI6 operative who wrote the famous 1984, has studied the works of Mosenberg in great detail. In fact, his best-known statement was based on what Mosenberg has said was the basis of propaganda. Quote, political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectful and to give the appearance of solidity to pure wind. Quote from George Orwell. As his German counterpart, Mosenberg said, all news is lies and all propaganda is disguised as news. That's why they control it. It is useful to know about Mosenberg as he helped us to understand how politicians operate and how secret forces control access to information and how public opinion is shaped and molded. Bernays certainly followed the master who never deviated from his methodology. Without knowing these things, we can never understand how President George Bush is able to do the things he does and not have to face the consequences. Yes, indeed. It has certainly enabled me to trace the origins of the so-called neoconservatives, or they're called neocons, that shaped his policies right back to his founder, Urban Kristol, Kristol, who admits to having been an avowed follower of Leon Trotsky. Unbelievable. I didn't know that, folks. Continue. Tavistock remains the mother of all research facilities, connecting with behavior modification, opinion making, and shaping of political events. What Tavistock did was to create a black hole of deception in the 20th century. Its task would have been made a great deal more difficult had it not been for the prostitution of the media and its role in disseminating the gospel according to George Orwell. Lord Northcliffe, the chief of Tavistock's predecessor, Wellington House, had been a media mogul. At one stage, went so far as to ship thousands of copies of his Daily Mail to France each week and then have them delivered by a fleet of motor trucks to British troops at the front lines to win their hearts and minds in support of the war. Especially here in the United States, it's virtually taken over the MIT. Stanford Research, the SESALEN, I'll have to learn how to pronounce that, Institute, the Wharton School of Economics at Pennsylvania University, UP, Hudson Institute, which is a conservative think tank, and the Kissinger Associates, Duke University, and many more institutions we have come to think of as wholly American. The RAND Research and Development Corporation, under the tutelage of Tavistock, has had a profound influence on so many institutions and segments of our society. These are all think tanks, folks. And they get paid government money to do this. Do you know that? And then they teach students this stuff, you see. As one of the principal research institutions directly controlled by Tavistock, RAND runs our ICBM program. I never knew that. Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles Program. This prime analysis for U.S. foreign policy makers and advisors on nuclear policies, does hundreds of projects for the CIA in the field of mind control. Some of RAND's clients include AT&T, Chase Manhattan Bank, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Department of Energy, and BM. I don't know what BM is. What it stands for. Anyway, RAND is one of the major Tavistock controlled institutions in the world and working on brainwashing at all levels, including government, military, religious organizations. The Anglican Church Desmond Tutu was one of RAND's projects. They're all over the place. Take another example. Georgetown University, perhaps one of the top institutions of higher learning in America, starting in 1938. The entire structure of Georgetown was made over by Tavistock. All of its learning formats and programs altered to suit a blueprint drawn up by its Tavistock Brain Trust term. And I believe Georgetown is also a Jesuit school. This has had great significance for U.S. policies, especially in the area of foreign policy relations. Without exception, the U.S. State Department field officers are trained at Georgetown. Some of Georgetown's, that is Tavistock, better known graduates are Richard Armitage, Armitage, and Henry Kissinger. Just how much damage these two members of the John Rawlins Reese Invisible Army have done to the well-being of our country will have to be told at another time. There is mounting evidence of increased input into our intelligence agency by Tavistock. When we think of intelligence in the U.S., we generally think of the CIA or the Division 5 or the FBI. But there are a great many other intelligence agencies receiving instructions from Tavistock. Those include the Defense Department Intelligence, that is the DIA, the National Reconnaissance Office, that is the NRO, and the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, and the Treasury Intelligence Service, the TIS, the State Department Intelligence Service, the Drug Enforcement Agent, that is DAA, and at least 10 others. How and when did Tavistock begin its career? As I said in my 1969 and 83 works, when we think of Tavistock, we automatically think of its founder, British Army Major John Rawlins Reese. You need to look these people up and find out who they are, learn more about them. All these people are key people, folks, very important people. Up until 1969, there were very few people in Britain outside of intelligence circles who knew of the existence of Tavistock, let alone what was being done in the facility in London and Sussex. Tavistock provided services of sinister nature to those people we find in every city across this nation, people who have local and state government officers and police departments in the palm of their hand. This is the case in every major American city also, where the Illuminati members of Freemasonry use their secret powers of control to walk over the Bill of Rights, intimidating and brutalizing innocent citizens at will. Where are the statesmen who once made this country great? I wonder about that too, my friend. What we have in their places are lawmakers who do not enforce the laws they make, and who are terrified to correct the obvious wrongs that abound on every hand, afraid because if they obey their oath of office, they might find themselves without a job. They are also lawmakers who do not have even the vaguest idea what a constitutional law is, and they do not seem to care. They pass laws that were never tested as to their constitutionality. The majority of the legislators do not know how to do this anyway. As a result, anarchy prevails in Washington. It may well come as a shock to most candidates who run for House and Senate spots that each and every one of them is carefully checked and profiled by the behavior modification scientists at Tavistock, one or more of its affiliates in the USA. Any candidate who is pliable to suggestions and found to be easy to control is puffed, P-U-F-F-E-D. Suffice to say that a spirit of unconstitutional lawlessness pertains in the Congress, which is why we are insulted by such measures as the Brady Bill or the Feinstein Assault Weapons Bill. Assault weapons in 2003, the Homeland Security Bill and the Patriot Act do not appear anywhere in the Constitution and are all therefore a prohibition. Feinstein's law looks suspicious like the work of Tavistock Institute. The Constitution being the supreme law of the land. Gun control laws are null and void. Guns are private property. Guns do not come under interstate commerce. Every U.S. citizen of sound mind, of legal age, and not a felon, has a right to keep and bear arms in any quantity and any place. This was staged by the great St. George Tucker, who declared, the Congress of the United States possesses no power to regulate or interfere with the domestic concerns of any of the states. It belongs to them, that is the states, to establish any rules respecting the right of property. Nor will the Constitution permit any prohibition of arms to the people or peaceful assembly by them for whatever purpose and in any number whatsoever they may see the occasion. Blackstone's views on the Constitution, page 315. Any candidate who is not going to be easy to control, who does not fit the Tavistock profile, is ushered out. In this, the print and electronic media, under Tavistock directions or one of its affiliates, plays a key role. Let the voter beware, let the public beware. Well, part of that issue, if I would beg with you, is simply to say if people didn't vote, there would be no one to govern us because we are the authority. We've always been the authority, but we've been told we're not. And we let these people run all over us. And so a lot of times simply is you back out of the system and say, no, I'm not going to participate in this, so I'm not going to vote. And it take me off the list because I'm not voting anymore. Because voting itself is consent. That's what it is. I like things the way they are. That's why I'm voting. I believe we're free. No, you're not. But I'm voting. I voted today. You can't blame me. All this non-bullshit, this bullshit out here, people believe. These little short messages people say, I voted today. I'm a good citizen. Yeah. Our election process has become a farce thanks to the world. One of the things you want to understand, fifthly, if you want to destroy the system, you don't be a part of the cog. You're no longer a part of the gear mechanisms, and you become a cog in the system. You say, no, I disagree on moral reasons, period. Our election process has become a farce thanks to the work done by Tavistock in controlling the thoughts and ideas of the people of this nation by means of interdirectional conditioning and long-distance penetration, in which the mind-control science of polling is an intricate part. Tavistock serves the black nobility in all its elements, working to rob us of the victory of the American Revolution in 1776. If the reader is unfamiliar with the black nobility, of course the term does not refer to black people. It refers to a group of extremely wealthy people, dynasties whose history dates back for more than 500 years, and who make up the backbone of the Committee of 300. On the international front, as well as in any area of these institutions in the U.S. who decide foreign policy, Tavistock does psychological profiling at all levels of government, as well as intruding into private lives or truly vast and on a true vast scale. Tavistock develops profiles and programs for the Club of Rome, the CINI, that is CINI Foundation, the German Marshall Fund, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Bilderbergs, the CFR and the Trilateral Commission, the DITCHLEY, DITCHLEY Foundation, the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, the United Nations and the World Bank, Microsoft, Citibank, New York Stock Exchange, and so on. This is by no means a complete list of institutions in the hands of the Tavistock planners. The propaganda barrage that preceded the 1991 Bush-Gulf War was based around a psychological profile of a huge populations group in the U.S. Prepared by Tavistock. The results were passed on to opinion makers, also known as advertising agencies on Madison Avenue. So effective was this propaganda that within 2 weeks, people who didn't even know where Iraq was on the map, let alone who his leaders were, began to shout and clamor for war against a dictator who threatened Americans' interests. Frightening, isn't it? Yes, but unfortunately 100% true. The very words of Gulf Crisis were drafted by the Tavistock Institute to arouse maximum support for the Bush war on behalf of the Committee of 300 flagship company, British Petroleum. Interesting. That was all done for that. Wow. So Americans, you see what it said here. Americans gave their lives up for a corporation called the British Petroleum because apparently they wanted the piece of the pie in the lot. That's what I'm guessing. We now know, at least some of us know, that what a big role Tavistock plays when it comes to creating public opinion based on obfuscation, lies, dissimulating, misrepresentation, and outright fraud. There isn't any other institution in the world that can hold a candle to the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. Quoting from my updated 1984 report, there are a few institutions of publishing business that are catching on to changes that are occurring. The latest issue of Esquire magazine carries an article entitled Discovering America. Esquire does not mention Tavistock by name, but this is what it says. During the social revolution, a very significant phase of the 70s, most of the rituals and personal interaction and institutional life were radically altered. Naturally, these changes have affected the way we perceive the future. The economic base of America is changing and new services and products are being offered. The article then went on to state that our professional lives, our leisure lives, our education system are being altered. And more important, the thinking of our children is being altered. The writing of Esquire article concluded, America is being transformed as is the direction it will take in the future. Occasionally, our new American section that is promised for future editions of Esquire won't seem so new, since most of the new thinking has been creeping into the mainstream of American life, but until now, it has gone unnoticed. I could not have given a more fitting description of the fallacies. Time changes things. Nothing changes on its own. All changes are engineered, folks. And as Roosevelt would say, nothing happens by coincidence. It's planned that way. So that was all about the situation with the war, basically Japan attacking Pearl Harbor. It wasn't a coincidence. It was planned that way. Whether in secret or in public, while Esquire didn't say who was responsible for the changes, for the most part about unwanted changes that we the people attempted to resist. Esquire is not alone in its contentions. Millions of Americans living in total ignorance of the forces shaping their future. They are unaware that America is being thoroughly conditioned by Tavistock, interdirectional long-range penetration method. The worst part of it is that these millions, these millions, because of Tavistock conditioning, making Americans think in the way Tavistock would have them to think, no longer seem to care. They have been interconditioned through long-range penetration, the master control plan set up by Tavistock to brainwash the nation for so long that they now suffer a constant state of shell shock. As we shall see, let me take a break here. As we shall see, there is good reason for this apathy and ignorance. The unwanted forced changes we have been subjected to as a nation are the work of several master theoreticians and technicians who joined John Rollins Rees at Tavistock Institute. And that concludes that chapter 23. And I believe I need to take a break tonight because I spend almost an hour here reading this, and that's probably a little long for some people. So my encouragement for all of you who do listen to this, I would encourage you to share it with others. I'm 62 years old. I don't know anybody even in my own area who even reads these books that I read. I do this because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm somebody better than anybody else. The reason why I read these books is simply to enlighten people who have interest in being truly free. I'm not interested in quote unquote attacking Washington or anything of that nature. My interest is to give you solid foundational information so that you can decide for your own and make your decisions based upon that. Because many people would like to go march in the streets, and that's what they want you to do, you see. They want you to march in the streets because you're actually begging the government to do what you want them to do. When reality simply is by rescinding your power, that is no longer voting, that sends a clear message to them that you're no longer going to be a part of this stuff. So I wish you a good night. I thank you for the listeners tonight, and I appreciate you listening. And I would encourage you to look into these books, search them out for yourself, and find out what truth is all about. Don't hide underneath a bushel, folks, because the light is within you already if you desire the truth. Okay? You have a good night. You take care.